Guys, as a treat, every third or fourth episode, we'll be inviting a guest from Inside Football. Today, we've got the pleasure of having Danny Guthrie with us. Danny is a colleague and the head coach of our team. He's a product of the best club in the world, Liverpool. Danny, welcome to the show.
No, thank you for having me. As you say, yeah, former player, now coach. So I've only recently made the transition, obviously, with TFA and EPC. Loving every minute of it.
Can you tell just the audience who doesn't know you a bit about your career?
Yeah, I hate talking about myself, but I come through the youth system at Liverpool. I made my debut under Rafa Benitez when I was 18. Lucky enough to play in the Champions League for that team. Around 20, I signed for Newcastle. They sold me to Newcastle purely because I wasn't going to play enough game time in that side. It was a really strong team, and then obviously played for Newcastle for 4 or 5 years, and just made over 100 Premier League appearances, 150 Championship appearances. Played in Europe, and it's only just now in this part of my life where I actually look back and think, did okay, but I still don't feel comfortable talking about it.
Forever the modest, did okay.
Yeah.
You think you did better than okay?
Yes, it's always great to hear your stories, and because we've heard many of your stories, now we want to share some of the stories with our audience. So maybe you can share some inside football story that happened with you in your career.
I know you well. We spoke in the car, and I know you like this one. It's for all the glitz and glamour of the Premier League and the top coaching and the top players. I remember once we played against Hazard when he just signed for Chelsea, and it was the second game of the season, and he'd made his debut the opening day, and he was wow, and we watched the video, and the simple tactic was the nearest player, take him down as soon as possible, don't let him get in momentum. And honestly, I've never seen a player with a mentality of to be kicked and cut and his socks cut and his ankles bleeding and 10-15 fouls in one half and just get up, say nothing, give me the ball, let me go again. And it was an eye-opener for me, even at I must have been 24, 25, to see that type of mentality of no problem. He was just, I'm better than you, so do what you want, give me the ball, I'll go again. And it's just, for all, like I said, all the glitz of the Premier League, sometimes it's as simple as, take him down.
Yeah, I think many people see that on the TV. They see the dribble, the beautiful parts, the highlights, but they don't see that part that you saw, his mentality, psychology.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, yesterday's episode, we were talking about, or last week's episode, sorry, we were talking about the whole idea of the show is inside football. So these young players across the world who want to break into football and have the great career you've had, we said know your level. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you talk about Hazard. Obviously, he knew his level. Mm-hmm. You started quite young, but you were spotted quite young. Mm-hmm. How did you learn your level, or what did you know, the gauge of your level? When did you know you were good enough? And how?
I was just the best player in every team I played in. And that goes from 8 years old, from local grassroots to school to county, district, and then you get picked up by Liverpool at 10. And then the aim is to be the best in that group. And that's when it gets really serious and really tough, because to be the best at grassroots was simple. If I can say that. To be the best in the school was simple, was easy. I didn't have to really extend myself. But then going to the academy, where it was everyone was the best player in their school and everyone was the best player in their little town or district or in Liverpool, and that's when the fight really started at 10 years old. Because at the end of the day, I remember speaking to the coaches of Liverpool after I'd turned professional and played a few games. You're not only competing in your group, I've got to be better than someone in the group older than me. But there's also 2 age groups below they're looking at thinking, is he worth investing in if I've got this under 12 here who's going to be, in a year, he's going to be better than him, or the under 11, they're looking 2 years, 3 years ahead. So the competitiveness every year is, is ferocious, because you're not only competing with your age group, you're competing to try and push someone out in front of you, and you've got lads who are 1, 2, 3 years younger than you who they're looking at going, if he doesn't step up, I'm going to get him. And it's just, honestly, every day is a real high pressure situation.
It's a harsh business.
It is, yeah. I mean, look, as a coach, ex-coach, now director, I'm always talking about psychology. You know, at 8 years old, 10 years old, how do you develop that competitive psychology? And what do you say to this new fad where they want to make football uncompetitive or sport uncompetitive?
Yeah, it baffles me, honestly. My parents were I've got no shame in saying my parents were really tough on me in terms of expectations and ability to give everything on a football pitch from a very young age. I would get punished if they felt I wouldn't give 100%. You know, everyone can play bad, but if they felt I wasn't giving everything in a training session or a game, or, you know, and at the end of the day, I look at it from their point of view, and at that age they're probably you know, late 20s, so they're in a good part of their life. They're sacrificing going out. They're spending all their money on travel and petrol. I've got 2 sisters in the car who are kicking and screaming because they don't want to travel. And if I go somewhere and, you know, give it a little bit of a go, or they let me know. So that was the pressure that come from then. But then as I got older, I developed my own sort of standards that I wanted to be a footballer, and I knew that I had to be the best in every age group growing up, else I had no chance.
It's interesting that, because when I talk to parents, especially when I worked in the academy, we used to call it too much salt or too much sugar. And I think your parents got it right, clearly. Because some parents sugarcoat it too much. You know, you're good, you're never bad.
Yeah.
And then they accentuate the kid's you know, what he thinks he is. And then you got the other parents that hammer him no matter what he does.
Yeah.
And I think it's finding that balance, which is interesting, because what you say, that develops your psychology at a young age.
Yeah.
You know, no need for sports psychologists if your parents get there in you. And by the way, that's why you are like that with our players. When they don't give that 100%, that's why it burns you.
I honestly, the most challenging part for me as a coach is feeling like I want it more than the players, or I want to win a battle more than the players, just because of my success, and my recipe to get to the top was based off that, and it's a recipe that worked for me, so I think it's a recipe, and it's the simplest recipe, and I didn't appreciate it until I got a little bit older, that my parents, what they were doing, because as much as I say they were harsh and tough, they also made me feel like $1 million as well, and they made me feel like I was the best player, on top of, you know, the expectations. And then it was sort of when I got to 15 and they'd done the 6-7 years of all the travelling, and it was time for me to go into digs to live. I remember my mum dropping me off at the house where I was going to live with the family, and she just said, well, it's over to you now, job's done from us, you know, you're on your own, sort of thing. And I always tell the boys that from that, even at 15, from that moment, I felt a real big expectation to become a footballer. But if I wasn't going to become one, it was only going to be because I wasn't good enough. I did everything. I worked as hard as I could because I knew what they'd done for me, and I couldn't look them in the face in 5 years. If I turned around and said, oh yeah, I got lost in going out in Liverpool and girls, that would have been a really difficult conversation for me. It was, if I wasn't going to make it wasn't good enough, and I knew they would accept that.
Yeah. I remember from the first episode we talked about right people, so I think in this situation clearly the parents are the first step, the first right people who put it in a correct way. The second, I think the coaches, as you said, now you are in this position, and I think the third, not less important people, are the agents, because they are, when you go, you know, above 18, above 15 even nowadays, they are stepping up, and they play a big role, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, well done, mum and dad. I'm sure they'll be watching this, because they obviously they got it right, and it's very difficult, especially what they did at 15, when they give that accountability. Now it's over to you, which is brilliant. Yeah, I mean, look, we talked about if you are that guy, if you're the top in the school, in the county, get the right people around you to give you an objective opinion. The first thing an agent does, they're not going to sign you if you're no good. So we'd like to hear from you. I mean, finding good agents. You know, we all know the reputation of agents, good and bad. What's your story on that?
With agents, my story is I was so when I was at Liverpool as a young player, I had an agent for a year, and he gave me a little bit of bad advice at one time. So I went into. He actually looked after Micah Richards at the same time, and we were sort of breaking through simultaneously. He was at City, and I was at Liverpool. And he'd brokered Micah Richards' deal after he'd broke into the first team at Liverpool. And we were both, I think he's a year younger. He was 17 and I was 18. And obviously he knew what he'd done in that deal for him. And I'll tell you, if Liverpool offered me, I was 18 and I'd just finished my first pro contract, which was £400. And then they offered me £3,500. But he'd done Micah Richards at £5,000. So he said to me, "Oh no, go and tell them you want 5,000." So
a week, right? We're talking
week,
about
yeah.
a week.
How old were you?
18.
And what year was that? Because inflation
Yeah,
and stuff. Back then it was, I think,
2006.
Oh,
No, 5, I think. 5, 6, something like that. And I remember Rafa Benitez pulling me in to the office, and I'm 18, played one game and nobody for him. And he just sort of said in a polite way, "Sign that fucking contract or you'll never train or play with this team again." And I got out and I signed that contract within an hour. And it was just from that point, in terms of agents, he gave me bad advice. Steven Gerrard heard about it, and I thought he was going to have give me a bollocking, but he pulled me in and said, "Look, you're going to be a good player. You need someone to look after you." And he introduced me to my next agent, and I worked with him for a long time, and he looked after me really well during my career. But halfway through my career, the agency world changed in terms of there was less exclusivity. Where when I first come into the business, when you had an agent, that was the only agent you could work with, and that was the only one who could do a deal. And it changed over time, where you could deals were brokered between agents, and you could have mandates and stuff. And I've got no bad words to say about the agent, because it's just the world he was in. But years later, when you move to a different club and the coach comes over to you and says, "Oh yeah, I made you an offer a couple of years ago," and I'm like,
oh, you never heard of it?
No, I rang your agent and said, "Look, we want to take him for this."
Oh.
But the agent said, "Oh yeah, this is my fee," and we said, "Oh no, we're not going to pay that fee." Okay, well, thank you.
So it didn't even come to
so
your part.
You get offers, and teams who want you, who you never know, because the agent's fee first isn't agreed on. So the agent says, "Well, if that isn't agreed, then you certainly can't agree with him." And I never know anymore. And you meet a coach or a manager 2 years later, and they say, "Tried to sign you 2 years ago." "Oh, really?" You're like, "Yeah." I said, "Oh yeah, but the agent said it wasn't possible if we couldn't pay." So,
Wow.
but it changed over time, where it become more open to other agents working together.
What do you think about the Kevin De Bruyne thing, where these guys think they can be their own agents? At a young boy, I think it's nearly impossible.
Yeah, I think difficult as a young player growing up. I think when you're Kevin De Bruyne now, easy.
Yeah.
But I think if my son become a footballer, because I know the industry, I would always look after him, just because I think I know what's best for him, and I know the industry well enough to steer him in the right way. I think looking back, my parents would have loved to have taken that responsibility, but they had no background in football, and you just can't compete with agents' connections at that point, because as a young player, it's really difficult if you don't have enough money in the bank to go to certain tables and talk. But yeah, I would always like to keep it in the family if possible.
So as a young boy now, I'm talented. How do I start getting an agent?
I think if you're talented, the agents will come to you. I don't think you have to go looking. I think football's it's very simple. If you're a good player, everything comes to you, whether that's agents, clubs, money. If you're good, it always comes to you.
But it's interesting, because we said that yesterday, or on one of the episodes. I said, get yourself with a good coach in a good team. So wherever you play, find the good teams.
Yeah.
Because when you play in a good team, you showcase better, and they watch the good teams.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way to do it. Right?
I think what people struggle with, and players, is they see they might see their mate go first. And I think that's hard in football, to watch someone progress quicker than you, or someone get an opportunity before you. I think that's what players struggle with, and then they go chasing, and that's when they get in trouble. But I think people always say that if you're good enough, it always comes to you in the end, and you just have to have this perseverance and this, this really thick skin in football to keep going.
So we understand that most importantly, everything depends on you at first place. You have to work hard. You have to find people. You have to put pressure on yourself. You have to get the discipline and everything right. So obviously you had a great background, a great story behind you, and great career, I will say. What are the tips you will give to get to that level where you're good enough that everything comes to you yourself,
I can only speak from my point of view, and I think even if look, I was a good player all my life and all through the academy, but there was better players than me, and there's worse players that were less talented. That made it, but at that level in the academies, and you get the odd one who's really, really special, who is going to be a world-class player, but generally everyone is sort of at the same level. And even when you get to the Premier League, the level between players, whether it's for someone, if you play against at Wigan or you play against someone at Tottenham, the level between the players technically is not very different. You obviously get the world-class players who are a bit different, but generally amongst the broader range of players, it's not that much difference. It's just the difference with the younger players is who's willing to sacrifice the most, who's willing to work the most, who's willing to be the most disciplined, who's willing to show up every day, and that's what separates everyone, really. I think I look back in my academy teams, there's no weak players in them groups. You're all pretty similar. There's one or two who will be the best, but it's very close. And then you'll just see, as the years go by, there's just people that drop off along the way at different stages for different reasons. Age comes into it, and people wanting to do things outside of football.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But being away from home and living in digs, Liverpool were very strategic with how they did that. They wouldn't let you live in Liverpool. They'd put you outside in Southport, where it's 40 minutes to get into Liverpool city centre on no money. You've got no choice but to stay in. And like I said, it is literally who's willing to stick this out for the next 2 or 3 years and be the best every day that they can be. And that's what makes.
Yeah, we talked about stickability in the first episode, and that's what you're talking about. It's interesting. The higher you go up the level, the lower the margins. It's just fine margins. It is literally fine margins.
It is. I mean, it's fun. Yeah. I mean, could I have played for a top team? I think so. Technically, I was just lacking 5-10% physicality to really be an England player or a Liverpool first team player full time. But everything else, no problem. But small margins of physicality and maybe a little bit of size and stuff like this, which make the difference at the top level.
It's interesting. We talked about this yesterday. If you're not in the top 3 in your school or your school team, can you improve physicality? So if you look back now, at some point of your growth, could you have improved physicality?
Yeah. But it's funny because the world changes, and 20 years ago we do things different, and
course, yeah.
There's more professionalism, there's more knowledge, there's more education. So what guys have got now is a lot better than what I had at 20, because a gym session was very, very general, where now it's very specific, and the coaches will do more individual training. We will just do a group session. So I do look back and think, with what we know now, of course, yeah, but at the time it was cutting edge. So
yeah. Definitely you had a great career, and now you're the coach, you're not a player anymore. But obviously you're looking back sometimes at some stages and realizing now with the time, with the matureness that you've got, that you've made some mistakes. So to our audience, most of them are like 15 to 25 years old. What are the advices you could give? What are the mistakes to avoid? I don't have any regrets. I
And
maybe based on other players' experience that
Yeah.
you saw, that wasted talent, wasted potential, not particularly.
yeah, growing
with
up
you.
is just growing up's at that age between 16 where you go full time to 19. You've got 3 years basically to become a professional in the academy system, and it will be for different reasons. Some will just fall off because they're just not quite good enough. Some will attitude is a big thing. Some come from really tough backgrounds, and it's hard to change a mentality of doing silly things or getting into trouble. Some people start going out. Some people get girlfriends, and life just goes in that direction. And there's just between that age bracket, there's so many distractions and so many obstacles, and it's really important of who you've got around you, whether that's an agent or your family, or if you're locked away like I was in digs, it made it easier. So I just think to avoid, be really mentally strong to avoid distractions at that age bracket, because like I said, life starts to become real and options become realistic,
Yeah.
and you start earning money. So I think that, but for me personally, now that I always say I always wrestle with myself, because I think, like I said, I can look back now and I think, oh yeah, I did okay. But then there's something in me that, I didn't play for England. That really bugs me. But I know I wasn't good enough, but it still hurts me.
Because you played at youth levels.
Yeah, so I played all the way through the levels, but realistically, I wasn't good enough to play for England in that generation because the standard was too high. But it still bugs me that from 8 years old, all I wanted to do was be a professional and play for England, and I couldn't achieve it. I didn't stay at Liverpool long enough because I wasn't good enough at that age, and I couldn't break into that team. That still bugs me. But overall, coming from where I come from, a small town, moving away, being a little bit light physically and not as quick as I needed to be, I overachieved, and I feel really, really proud about overachieving, and I love the fact that I overachieved, because on one hand, when I say I didn't play for England, you could think that I underachieved, but I didn't. To have 100 Premier League appearances, and some people say, oh, average Premier League player, Jesus Christ. Do you know how hard it is to be an average Premier League player? That's what, and so I wrestle with that constantly every day.
Most of us will take average Premiership
Yeah.
players. We'll happily
I will
take
take the bad Premiership player just to be a Premiership player,
I'll be a bench.
Talking about the mistakes, I remember another story you shared with me. It's not about mistake, it's about possible mistake that could have happened but didn't happen due to Stevie G. About your move to Newcastle, the advice he gave you about the playing time, get your chance. Yeah, can you share about that?
Yeah, so like I said, I'd been at Liverpool from 10, 11 years old. I'd played in the first team. I'd started to find my feet in terms of I was training well, and I was in training, and I was being a good player in training. That's the first obstacle, because when you first go to break in, obviously the nerves and you feel a little bit out of place. But I'd got myself in a position where I could affect training, and I started being a good player. And then I went on loan to Bolton, who were in the Premier League, and I did really well there, played in Europe for them. And I'd sort of established myself as a Premier League player, and I'd created a value for myself, and there was interest. But I never imagined leaving Liverpool at that point, and I went back to the club in the summer to start pre-season, and the boss pulled me in, Benitez, and he just said that I was going to play 10 games, 15 games, and I'd just turned 20, and he said it's just not enough for you. You can go and have a really good career, and who knows, sign for Liverpool in 5 years.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. I didn't really take it in. Because there wasn't really nothing on the table. He said, so if we get the right offer, we will accept it. So I was like, okay. But he said, if not, you can stay here and play. So it wasn't really real. And then days later, Newcastle come in. My agent phoned me and said they're going to make a bid. We'll see how it goes. They negotiated. And it's sort of, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, they won't agree. And then they agreed. And then they said, oh yeah, but they'll offer you, like, you've got to agree personal terms. Oh yeah, we won't agree. Then we agreed. And then it sort of snowballed really quickly, and they were like, oh, you've agreed personal terms, you've got to come up to Newcastle this afternoon. I was like, Okay. So I'm driving up the A1, which is a long road up to Newcastle. And out of nowhere, it just hit me that I was leaving Liverpool and I wasn't going to be a Liverpool player. And I just felt my stomach drop. And I was like, no, I can't. Because I was at my dream club. I was at the best place in the world as far as I was concerned in terms of the team. And I was so proud to be a Liverpool player.
Yeah, you've grown up there basically from 11 years old.
And he's a fan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just hit me, yeah. And I rang my agent and I said, look, I don't want to do this. I'm halfway up and I don't want to do it. And he went, no, you know, just go up there and have a look round the training ground, meet the manager. And I said, no, I really don't want to. Like, I want to stay at Liverpool. So he said, hold on, I'll call you back in a minute. So the phone started ringing and it wasn't his number. It was Stevie G. And he said, oh, what's going on? And I went, oh, well, I'm driving up to Newcastle. They've accepted a bid. And he said, that's amazing. And I was like, oh, I didn't want to tell. I was like, oh, yeah, I don't know, because, you know, Liverpool and all this. And he was like, oh, no, you're mad. He said, that is a proper football club up there. He said, go up there. He said, establish yourself as your own man, as your own player. Go and be the main man in someone else's team. Build that confidence. Establish yourself in the Premier League as someone who's a major player in a team. And he said, you never know what the future holds. He said, but don't be someone who fizzles out at a big club. And that was it. And as soon as he put the phone, I went, yeah, you're right. And I signed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you're talking about that 16 to 19-year-old, I was going to say, look, having good friends around you. I was the opposite story on my side. You know, my guys weren't into football. They were into clubbing and partying. And you know, in that crowd, you do follow that crowd. Yeah. And Stevie G obviously was a good friend in that call.
No,
having good friends is critical.
It's funny what you said. I was so ruthless at that age. And I think when I even think back, like to make this, I cut off everyone. I stopped speaking to people. I had friends that I obviously lived in my area with from 8 to 15, and I didn't speak to them for years because there was nothing that they could do for me or I could do. We were on. If they went to college, they went to going out, and they weren't footballers, and I just cut myself off and just tunnel vision. And then obviously, like you said, maybe if I didn't take that call off Gerrard and I went back to Liverpool, played 10 more games, fizzled out, found myself in League One, League Two.
Yeah.
I don't play in the Premier League again.
That's amazing story. I hear it for the second time, but it still amuses me, you know.
Inside football.
Yeah. And I think to wrap up the conversation, to go a little bit more personal now, what's your age now?
35.
35. What advice you would give to the 15 or 18 years old version of yourself?
I've spoke to Ali about this loads of times, and I can give the advice, but I don't think I wouldn't like to change it because I think it's me as a personality, and what makes me be so ambitious is I always think I wish I would have enjoyed it, but I try and explain to my boys now who are trying to be professionals and in better leagues is it's such a brutal sport. And it's so competitive and it's so mentally draining because every day you are fighting to get into the team, to stay into the team, to get a contract, to get a club. It is 15 years of just fight. And there's no one who can sit back, rest and enjoy because, like I said, you're either chasing someone down to get in the team or you're being dragged back by someone. And every day, and it just takes one bad session, and you can find yourself out the team for 2 months, then your contract might be running out, then you haven't played, then your agent's telling you, oh, it's going to be difficult to move, you haven't played, and it is just every day. And that's why I explained to the boys that they have to, every session and every game is so important, because the reality is, like I said, the fine margins, you're never so much better than someone else that they're not going to play. There's always someone there, and they're just waiting for you to slip. And the manager, the coaches, they're under so much pressure to win games. They have to play the one that looking at going, he's good this week, or he let me down this week. And going back to your question, I wish I would have enjoyed it, but on the other hand, that's what drove me on every day, and I can't change. And I'll give you an example. Sorry, another story about Stevie Gerrard. I always say to Ali that throughout all my time in football, the biggest names and the best players were always the nicest people. Always. I always found that the bigger the player and the biggest stars, they were always the nicest people. The arseholes were the ones in the middle who thought they were fucking brilliant, but he was brilliant. And I always tell my boys that they have to demand more of each other, and they have to demand more of themselves in terms of standards in training and standards around KSK, because it's never personal. And I remember Stevie G, because I didn't drive when I got into the Liverpool first team, and he used to give me lifts. So he'd give me a lift home. He'd sort me out if I needed taken anywhere. And I remember one training session. So I'd been with the first team for about a week. So I'd found my feet a little bit, and we were doing a practice. And I thought, oh, Gerrard, he really likes me. Like he gives me lifts, and he's always asking me out, and he's always looking after me. I thought, oh, he really likes me.
Best friend.
Yeah. And I thought, oh yeah. And so we were doing a passing drill, and I gave him, and it just worked out that the ball come to me, and me and him were working together, and I passed to him, and I passed him one, and it was a bit short, and it wasn't a good pass, and he, like, just give me a look a little bit. And then another one, I give him the next pass.
That famous look, huh?
Yeah, he just, little one. The first one. Second one wasn't great either. And he gave me another look. And I felt it. And I thought, oof. So the next one coming, I was nervous. I felt it. The next one. So the first two have been short. Next one, I've overhit. But just because of who he is and his mentality, he's chasing this ball. He's not giving up on it. And behind the goal is a big net behind the goal where to stop the ball's flying everywhere. I've put too much pace on it, and he's sprinting down this line, and he doesn't give up on it, and he's chasing it, and he just gets there just in time. He crosses it, but he falls over. He's in the net, tangled up. He can't get out. He's all this. And I'm standing there, and he gets out of the net, and he goes, "Oi, you!" And he gives me a mouthful and said, "This is the fucking first team now. Raise your standards, or you'll be back over there before you can even blink." And I was like, shit, I thought he was my mate. As soon as training finished, arm around me, "Where am I taking you today? Where do you need a lift?" And that's when I realised that on the training pitch, the standards these guys set every day, and they demand off each other, and they argue and they fight. But as soon as that whistle's gone and the training's finished, it's, "Okay, where do you need a lift? Where can I take you?" And that's what I'm trying to get the message to these guys. They have to do, and it's never personal. And you've got to be comfortable giving it, but you've also got to be humble enough to take it as well.
Yeah, it's just work ethic.
Brilliant. Look, we could sit here talking to you all day, but thank you. Thank you. That was brilliant inside football. I hope these guys enjoyed it. I hope they take the tips away from it. It's a tough, you said brutal sport. It's a brutal business as well. So keep working, guys. And
I think this is super exclusive as well, and not only exclusivity, we don't want to push it in a marketing way, but just generally it's super interesting and super useful, in my opinion. I think those kinds of episodes could be rewatched 3, 5, 10 times.
No, absolutely. Danny, thank you. Great guy and a great player.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks.